Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be discussing a very interesting, important topic tonight. Not to say that it's a dangerous topic, because nothing in Judaism is dangerous, but it's very hard to teach such a topic when you're sitting in front of a computer screen and you don't really know who you're talking to and what life experiences people have had and what emotional reactions people may feel to what we're discussing. So I am going to be a little bit careful or limited in what I say, only because I'm just speaking out to Facebook. I'm speaking out to a computer screen, and it's hard to have heavy conversations, emotional conversations, important conversations like this in such a setting. Okay, that being said, let's put my phone over here. That being said, oopsies, we're going to be talking tonight. Erev Tov, David Feingers, I'm glad you're watching. Erev Tov, Randy. If you're watching, say hi. I'd love to say hello to you. Tonight's topic will be marriage and divorce in Judaism. And of course, needless to say, the reason for that is because this week's Torah reading talks at great length about, not a great length, I take that back. It's not a great length at all. It's actually just a few short verses that discuss the laws of marriage and the laws of divorce. In fact, it's a little bit interesting and might be very surprising to some of you that are watching us tonight to know that the Torah actually does not have any section, so to say, where it clearly talks about marriage. Within the laws of divorce, we also see the laws of marriage. Oh, good evening, Yonatan. Good evening, Gail. And thank you for just your presence. Reminds me to mention, as we do every week, that tonight's class is Le'iloi Nishmas, in memory of the souls of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef and of Tzipor bat Hosea. They should have elevation in heaven, in Gan Eden. So, if you were to open, the Chumash, the Bible, and you were looking which chapter is the chapter that talks about the laws of marriage, it will be a little bit hard to find it. Almost, in fact, there isn't even a Hebrew word or a word in the Torah for marriage. It doesn't exist. There's no chapter heading, the laws of marriage. The opening, and where we're told about marriage, is in a little bit of a kind of, I don't want to use the word backwards, but in a unique setting. But let me not belabor the point. Let me share my screen. I'm going to share with you the actual text itself. Let me just make this smaller so you can see it for yourself, and then you'll make your own. You will make our own decisions from there. Okay. So I'm sharing with you the Torah reading for this week's Torah reading. It is chapter 24. I'm sharing this chapter 24, verse number 1. When a man takes a wife and is intimate with her. In the Hebrew that says, Ki yikach ish isha. When a man will take a wife, ubalan, he will be intimate with her. What will happen? Let me make this bigger. Once it makes it bigger, we'll change it. What will happen if she does not find favor in his eyes because he discovers in her an unseemly moral matter, and he writes for her a bill of divorce and places it into her hand and sends her away from his house? This is the verse. So basically the man, he took a woman. They were married. He found something in her which was inappropriate, not correct. And because of that, he writes for her, because of Allah, he writes for her a sefer krisos, a book of separation. He puts it into her hand and he sends her away. Okay. So first of all, the first very important thing we need to see over here is the fact, I'm going to share more, is that it's not like even coming to tell you about laws of marriage. It's coming to tell you about a person that got married and was unhappy in the marriage. He found things that were wrong. But you know what? I just changed my mind. Let's continue reading. We'll read the whole chapter, right? The whole few verses, and then we'll discuss. Verse number 2, she leaves his house and she goes and marries another man. And then verse number 3, if the later husband hates her and writes her a bill of divorce and places it into her hand and sends her away from his house, meaning man number 2 has also divorced her, or if the latter husband, husband number 2, who took her as a wife, dies, so now she's a widow, her first husband, who had sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife, since she was defiled to him, for that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin to the land the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance. So here the law is that if he married to this woman, she gets divorced, she marries a second man, she may not, or she's now divorced a second time, she's a widow, and then they want to get remarried. Once she was already married to another man, she may no longer marry this person a second time. If they were not if this woman was not married to a second person and she wants to remarry her first husband, that would be perfectly allowed. The issue is only if they were already married, she was already married to another man. Then the Torah continues, verse number 5, which is in the next aliyah. We're going to read one more verse, and then we're going to discuss everything. Verse number 5, when the man takes a new wife. So here you have not where there's divorce involved, but just where a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out into the army, nor shall he be subjected to anything associated with it. He shall remain free for his home for 1 year, and delight his wife whom he has taken. So this verse is telling us the law of a man that gets married, that for the first year of their marriage, what's called Shana Rishona, the man should be totally focused on making his wife happy, on being there for his wife. As it says, he should be 1 year free to delight his wife. Notice those words. His job, his primary job in the first year of marriage is to delight his wife whom he has taken. Okay, now, there is a lot that we need to discuss and to understand about the concept of marriage and the concept of divorce as we see it in this week's Torah reading. As I already said in my introduction, it's hard because some of you that are watching are divorced, some of you are on second marriages, third marriages, have many different feelings, and although you are free to ask any questions you want, whether you're chatting on the website or on Facebook, go ahead and put a comment. I will try my best, bli neder, to answer any question that anyone comments on Facebook, assuming that they're relevant to what we're discussing. Let us try and understand what the Torah is telling us here tonight. The first thing we need to understand is why is there not really a laws of marriage? That's one thing we're going to discuss tonight. Another thing we're going to discuss is what is the Jewish view of divorce? Is divorce something the Torah... Okay, let me say it this way. Many people think that divorce is a terrible thing. It's a last resort. Only the two of you cannot seem to find a way to get along. And every single day there's fighting and there's shouting and there's screaming. And so you get divorced, Nabach. Or is the Torah actually telling us to get divorced as if divorce is something good that needs to be dealt with? I think we're going to start with that question. We'll start with that question first, because I think we'll get to the marriage soon. Let's first start with the divorce, because that's the primary focus of these Torah verses. So how does Judaism look at divorce? Let's answer the question that I just asked, and you're free to comment on Facebook. Is getting divorced something that Judaism condones and allows and encourages, those are different words, or not? Now, actually, the verses we just read are counted as one of the 613 commandments, meaning there is a mitzvah of divorce. However, I should clarify before I go any further and let anyone have any misunderstanding of what I just said. Not all mitzvot, not all commandments are obligations which we need to search after. For example, you have a mitzvah to wash your hands before you eat bread and to make a birchat hamazon, to bless, to make the grace, the benching after you eat bread. That does not mean that you have a biblical obligation every day to eat bread. If you decide to go on a diet and you decide, I'm not eating any more carbs and no more bread, good for you. I mean, maybe not so good for you, but let's say it's good for you to go on a diet and it's good that you're not eating any bread. You are under no obligation to eat bread in order to fulfill the mitzvah of thanking Hashem for the delicious meal after you eat the bread. There are some mitzvot that are a chov, that are an obligation, and some that are a rishus. If you want to do it, you could. And then there are some mitzvot that are only if you are already in the situation. For example, if a person finds a lost object, yeah, you find a lost object, it's a mitzvah to return it. It's not a permission to do it or not. It's an obligation to return the lost object. However, the obligation only applies if you already found a lost object that had been lost. In no way do you have to go around town looking for lost objects in order to return the lost object. It's also in the Torah reading. If you happen to find an object that was lost, now there is a mitzvah upon you to go and to return it. Same thing as if a person finds themselves in a situation where they need to get divorced, the Torah clearly gives you a commandment how and in what way you should do this divorce. And each and every word of the verse that we just read, where the Torah says you should write v'kasav law, you should write for her a divorce. So from here we learn that the divorce has to be written, law has to be written specifically for her. It says, Sefer Krisos, it's going to be a book of divorce, a book of separation. And this means that you have to write the book in a way that it's a separation, that you cannot own any of the of what you're giving to her has to belong to her. You have to drop it into her hand. You cannot be touching when the man is giving the divorce to the woman, or if an agent of the man is giving the divorce to the woman. So I have a piece of, you can't hand it at the same time. So I just took off the floor for my daughter. But you have to actually drop it. That when it falls from this hand, there has to be a moment of separation until the woman catches it, etc. Many laws. I'm not getting to the laws tonight. If you need to get a divorce, you have to go to a professional scribe, a rabbi who's trained in the art of writing a proper get. It's actually written on it. But the whole way it's written, it's a special writing with a certain handwriting. Has to be written. There's no standard template, boiler form divorce document. Every divorce is custom written from the man for the woman. That is learned from the verse we just read. You should write it for her. Many other laws as well. However, back to what we were middle of discussing before. So the Torah tells you how exactly this should happen. But seemingly, why would Torah allow you to get divorced? We know that when two people get married, it's not just two people deciding to live a life together. When two people get married, it is actually two halves of one soul being reunited. But very briefly, what happens when we get married? You meet your bashert, you meet your designated one, the one that was designed in heaven to be the other half of your soul. And just like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, originally they were Siamese twins, originally they were part of one body, and then they were, in the surgery, God separated Chava from Adam, and they became disconnected into two independent, separate entities, one from the other. And then, through marriage, we reunite, we come back whole, we come back together to our other half. And that's why you have all those images and those, bracelets, those necklaces of the broken heart. It's based on the Jewish idea that the man and the woman are two halves of one heart, two halves of one soul. And when you're reunited, that's the idea of marriage. So seemingly, the idea of getting divorced is breaking your other half of your soul. Seemingly, getting divorced should be something that the Torah does not allow at all. And yet, not only does the Torah allow divorce, but it's actually a mitzvah that is described in detail in the Torah and in much, much greater detail in Jewish law. And so the analogy of divorce, the example to explain why Torah allows it, is just like amputation. Just like if a person, God forbid, has an illness in their body, they have an infection, God forbid, lo yaleinu, and the infection is spreading and they can't get rid of it, and if they don't amputate the leg, then God forbid, the whole body could be at risk, the person could die. So although it's obviously very painful and very difficult decision, there are times where you would be ritually required, or spiritually, morally rather be the right word, you'd be ethically required to amputate, God forbid, your leg, or not you, a person could be ethically required to amputate the leg in order to protect the rest of their body. And the same is true, there's a spiritual amputation. Divorce is like a spiritual amputation. And there's many comparisons over here. It's very, very painful, just like it's painful to cut off a limb of your body. It's painful to do that. Not only is it physically painful with the surgery and the rehab, but emotionally, thank God, I've never personally been involved in this decision. Thank God, I should never have to counsel someone through making this decision or know someone. But when I know people have had to make the decision, it's a very painful decision to make. And yet you have to do it because if you leave the limb attached with the infection or whatever it is, it could cause far more damage. So too, there are some unhealthy relationships that are not only they're unhealthy, they're toxic, they're poison. These are relationships that are truly, that if you remain attached to the spouse that is abusive, that is manipulative, that is hurting you in a very, very deep way, it's not just that you're living with something negative. That could, God forbid, kill the rest of the body. However, that being said, even though there's times that an amputation needs to be done, it is a last resort. Meaning that we do everything possible to avoid needing to amputate our body, our limb from our body. If there's even a remote chance that a limb could be saved, even though it's going to be a lot of effort and a lot of expense and a lot of, going to doctors and therapies. And I'm right now helping a woman who might have to have a surgery, speaking to her. And of course, she doesn't want to have the surgery. If they have the surgery, they would have to remove from within probably her ovaries or uterus, whatever. She can get into the medical. But the point is, even though she's going to the doctor every week, and now she's had that doing monitoring and checking, doing a CAT scan every week and all that, ultrasound every week, but it's worth it to go through all the hassle and all the expense and all the effort and all the, we call agmas nefesh, the emotional stress, in order to perhaps not have to give up a limb of my body. Of course, you go through it. So yes, there are times that getting divorced is the best thing you can do for the body, because you're cutting off a very unhealthy infection that if you leave it will continue to fester, continue to give poison and toxins to the rest of the body. But at the same time, it's not something you just do it easily. It's a last resort, meaning only after you did everything else and you tried every medication and you went to every doctor and to every therapy and to every marriage counselor and after months and maybe years of trying whatever you could to save your marriage, and eventually you have no choice and you concede the defeat, then it's okay. But you have to, it's a last resort. It's a last resort. Which is why today there's a problem that many young people get married and they almost go into the marriage knowing that if it doesn't work, I can always get we can get divorced. Meaning in the olden days, many of the people that are watching are from that generation. So God forbid to call anybody old. But in a previous era, in a previous generation, marriage was for life. So you got married with the expectation that the two of you would remain forever together. Now, yes, it doesn't always work that way, and there was times that people got divorced, but the general mindset was that we're here forever. However, today there's a certain social acceptance of divorce, which is good to a certain extent, that it allows people that need to get divorced to get divorced, but almost where we've come to a point where, okay, I'll amputate the limb. And that shouldn't be the mindset at all. Anyway, that's as far as why you're allowed to get divorced. It's like an amputation. However, that being said, getting divorced is something which is very painful. Do you know that it says that when a couple gets divorced, the mizbeach, the altar in the temple cries bitter tears. The altar in the temple cries bitter tears. Why is that? Because, you know what? let's first get through a few of the laws of divorce, and then first a few laws of divorce. Then I'm going to get to this whole discussion about why the Mizbeach cries bitter tears, and then we'll get to the idea of marriage. Okay, deal? You with me? First, the technical stuff. We got to get it out of the way, but we can't skip it. So, a couple's getting divorced. I'm not going to get into the technical detail, but just to give you a general overview of how a Jewish divorce works, based on the Torah reading of this week's Torah reading. So they decide to get divorced. They go to a rabbi and they've tried and they've done everything they could. They've reached a point where they must get an amputation. They cannot live together. Oh, by the way, good evening to all those that are watching. I didn't say good evening to. Good evening, Jacob. Good evening, Andrea. Thank you for saying hi. Good evening, Amy, everyone else that's watching. So they go to a rabbi. They're going to get a get. The Hebrew word for a divorce contract is called a get. Although, hello Martha, how are you? Although to be correct and to be accurate, get is not a G-E-T. G-E-T, get, is not a Hebrew word. It's actually an Aramaic word from the Talmud, which means a contract or a proof of the dissolution of the separation of the marriage. Now, in today's times, obviously, if you're getting a get, you need to get a civil divorce as well. However, a civil divorce in no way can, what's what I'm looking for? Replace or be instead of a proper get. Because the civil divorce can maybe end and terminate the civil marriage. But the marriage between a husband and a wife is a Jewish marriage. It's a kedushin, it's a chuppah, it's a ksuba, it's a marriage document. And even if it's not a marriage document, even if you had a couple that did not get married according to Jewish law with a rabbi under a chuppah, the fact that they were living together as husband and wife, and that they were intimate and they had sex between them and etc., this alone is enough to make a husband and wife considered legally married by Jewish law. I plan on ending the class talking about the three different parts about how marriage works. Marriage could be done through the ksuba, through the marriage document. It could be done through the ring. It could be done through intimacy. So if a man has given his wife a ring, that's a form of marriage. Even if there was no rabbi under the chuppah. They were living together, they're married. And therefore, in order for the couple to halachically, to Jewishly, be considered divorced, they need to get a get. There'll be a Jewish proof of separation in between them. In addition, marriage from a spiritual level is not just two people living together. Marriage is about God bringing together two souls, as I said. And therefore, the same God that prescribed the formula for the fusion of the souls, of these seemingly opposites of man and woman to come together, is seemingly an impossibility. A man and woman can't get, in logic, a man and woman can't get married. The fact that they're able to get married is only because God put them together. And therefore, since their union is because God put them together, their separation and they're returning back to two separated states of independence can also only happen with the formula that God gives. Okay. The get, the actual document, is written in Aramaic. It's written, as I said before, by an expert scribe, specifically for this man and this woman. There is no, unlike a ksuba that the rabbi fills in, they have very beautiful ksubas that are with beautiful calligraphy and beautiful paintings on them, and the rabbi just fills in the name and the date, etc. A separation document, a get, as the Torah says, has to be written for her in mind. You cannot use, in fact, there's even a discussion in Jewish law. If a person wrote a get for one woman, and a different woman came to get divorced, or the same name, same man, same woman, same name for the man, same name for the woman, about using etc., it wouldn't work. I hear you, Andrea. Okay. Now, again, so you have this document. The document to get is written in Aramaic. Well, I guess it can be written by any language, but it's written, we have a standard, language. The get is done in front of a bestin, in front of a court of three rabbis. Although technically you only need two witnesses to see the man giving the wife the get, But today, rabbis don't do gittin at all. There's no rabbi. I don't know any rabbi as a rabbi that does gittin. There's rabbis that have a beis din. Let's say when people come to me about a get, you go to the beis din in Miami, you can go to the beis din in Boca, either Rabbi Flog or Rabbi Senderovic. These are people that are part of a beis din, and the beis din gives the get. As I said, there has to be a dropping of the document from the man to the woman without any touching in between. There has to be a complete separation. Now, what happens if the man and the woman don't want to see each other's faces? Sometimes you have a divorce that doesn't end so nicely, and just putting the man and the woman back into the same room is already, you might need more than just a beis din. You might need a police presence to keep everyone in their seats. So a person, both the man and or the woman, can appoint a shliach, can appoint a messenger to do their half of the get on their behalf, which means that the man can appoint a beis din, or one of the rabbis of the beis din, to be his agent to give the get to the woman on his behalf. So to the woman, let's say the woman doesn't want to be present at this ceremony, she can appoint one of the rabbis of the beis din to be her agent to give the get to receive the get on her behalf. So therefore, they don't, in fact, I don't say I've been involved in usually both of the man and woman were not both present in the room at the same time. At least one of the parties of the marriage was being represented by a member of the beis din who was acting as an agent on their behalf. Okay. Once they get divorced, they are 100% separated, and then they can each go their own way, etc. Okay. Now let's talk about the mizbeach crying. Why does the mizbeach cry? So it says, let me just explain what I just said. That was just a general overview of what happens in a Jewish divorce. Now, the Talmud says that when a couple get divorced, there is the altar that was in the temple begins to shed tears. Why does the altar shed tears? So seemingly because it's very, very sad. It's very sad that the couple couldn't stay married, and that they not only that, Torah puts the idea of shalom bayis, of peace. Shalom bayis is actually a very important topic. It's not tonight's topic, but shalom bayis means peace in a home. For God, or to God, I should say, the value of shalom bayis, of peace in a home, is one of the highest ideals in Judaism. And in fact, I would hope that any rabbi, but for sure most rabbis will tell you that many areas that I have to be careful how I say this, you can sacrifice in certain ways. I'm being very, what I said has to be analyzed on an individual basis, on an individual case. But to sacrifice certain parts of Jewish observance and Jewish ritual for the sake of shalom bayis, for the sake of a happy marriage. And again, this is a very, very generic statement that I'm clearly saying needs to be understood based on your individual situation. But absolutely, that if you come to a rabbi and you say, I'm holding at this level of my Jewish observance, and my wife is holding here, or vice versa, and this is straining our marriage, absolutely the rabbi will tell you, well, you better find a compromise, even if that means perhaps, for the meantime, cutting back on certain levels of observance in order to maintain and to keep a healthy, happy marriage. When a couple has a suspected cheating happening between them, and they come before the temple, and there's a whole process of a sota, where the man comes to the priest and says, I think my wife was cheating, and he tests her by making her drink water that had a parchment, that had God's name erased from the parchment and scratched out, the ink was scratched out from the paper and put into the water, and she drinks it. God himself says, I'm willing to allow my name, God's name, the name of God, which is not allowed to be taken into an unholy place, that can't be put onto the floor, that has to be treated with the ultimate respect and dignity. God says, I am willing to allow my name to be erased and to be desecrated and put into water to save a marriage. And therefore, we are told in the Talmud that when a couple gets divorced, the mizbeach, the altar in the temple, begins to cry. It sheds tears. Why does it shed tears? So again, simply it's because it's sad. But the truth is, there's a specific reason why the mizbeach, the altar of all the vessels in the temple, are shedding tears. It's specifically the altar, and specifically why it's crying. What was the job of the altar in the temple? So the menorah was there to shine light to the world. The ark was there to hold the tablets, the luchot. The table was there for the bread that the priests would eat. What was the job of the altar? The outer altar, not the inner altar. The outer altar. It was to receive the offerings of the Jewish people. And the offerings were generally in one of two generic categories. There were sin offerings, multiple kinds of sin offerings, a carbon asham, a carbon chatas, different forms, different variations. But they were basically some form of atonement where a person did a sin, a person made a mistake, whether it was on accident, whether it was on purpose, depending on what the sin was, what his crime had been. He's bringing an offering of atonement to the altar. The other general kind of offering that was brought is an offering of thanks, an offering of appreciation, whether it's the carbon shlamim, which is a peace offering, or the carbon ola, which was a burnt offering, or bringing the bikurim, the first fruits, etc., the carbon pesach. The offering was some form of celebration and appreciation and thanks to God for the blessings that we have. Now, this is obviously exactly what was missing in the marriage, or what was needed in the marriage to make a marriage work. In order for a marriage with a husband and wife to work, one of two things have to be happening on somewhat of a regular basis. One is a sin offering. Not like, there's a joke that if you want to have a happy marriage, the first word out of your mouth every morning should be, "I'm sorry, honey, I messed up." But on a serious note, every single human being has our flaws, whether it's our natural character, or whether it's, times we get stressed out and we make mistakes and we forget things. And every single human being is going to at times do something that will either hurt their spouse accidentally, they'll forget something their spouse asked for, they'll say something not that they thought was a joke. They were just making fun. They didn't realize that women are very sensitive when it comes to the size of their body or weight or whatever the joke was about, or that whatever. I don't need to get into examples. You all have enough examples in your own life. Every human being in the best marriage will have a moment. Hopefully it becomes more and more rare the longer you're married and the more you understand what's important, how your wife reacts and feels about certain things. But it'll make a difference. There'll be times that you'll have to be willing to fess up and say, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you hurt. I'm sorry that I forgot. I'm sorry this happened." And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making a mistake. There's nothing wrong with being, saying something that wasn't sent. I shouldn't say nothing wrong, but it's normal. It's human. The issue is not making the mistake. The issue is being unable to say sorry afterwards. The other kind of offering brought in the temple is thanks offerings, appreciation offerings. Again, any marriage has to have moments, not only on the birthday and anniversary, on a regular basis, where the man and the woman, both, where the spouse does something. It can be as simple as just saying thank you. It doesn't have to be expensive bouquets of roses, but where the man and the woman take time to show appreciation, to show thanks, to show gratitude to their spouse. If there is a marriage that is breaking up, if there's a marriage that's being ended and terminated, it is because these two offerings were not brought. There was a lack of appreciation and thanks in the marriage, and there was a lack of honesty and responsibility and ownership in the marriage. I believe that it's a fairly fair statement to make about basically any marriage that exists. There has to be ownership, responsibility, and there has to be gratitude. There has to be thanks. There has to be times regularly where we spend time with our spouse just to show them how important they are to us, just to show them how much we value them and appreciate them. And therefore, if a couple is getting divorced, the altar of all the vessels in the Mishkan, of all the vessels in the temple, the one that cries is the altar, because it knows that the person should have brought more of these offerings and didn't. And the truth is, I wasn't planning to get into a marriage class tonight, but of course, when you talk about something, and obviously as a rabbi, you deal with families and you see this happening over and over again, being careful that I know I'm talking to many people that are divorced. Every one of us are responsible for our marriage. Every one of us are responsible. And when things start to go wrong in the marriage, we need to ask ourselves, I need to ask myself, am I being fair? Am I giving them enough attention that they deserve? Am I living up to my responsibilities? Am I doing enough to make them feel loved and appreciated and respected? Am I doing that which they've told me and asked me to do that I know they want? And do you know when marriages begin to fall apart? Is when people say, well, what is she doing for me? What is he doing for me? When's the last time he showed me appreciation? When's the last time she said thank you for me making her dinner, et cetera, et cetera? And this is why, one of the reasons why, the law of divorce is taught before the law of marriage. It's a very strange thing. I said we're going to get to this question, and now we're going to get to it. The Torah doesn't really come and tell you straight up, if a man wants to marry a woman, let them live happily ever after. Verse number 5, if you remember, I'll share my screen again. The verse that talked about being married, the first year of a brand new wife and living happily ever after and pleasuring your wife, that was verse number 5. That was verse number 5 that said that when a man takes a new woman for himself as a wife, the first year he shouldn't go to war, he shouldn't go to fight in the army, he should spend the year at home, focused and dedicated on pleasuring and giving his wife, building up a marriage. Why is that not verse number 1? Why is verse number 1 about divorce? So there's a joke, it's not really a joke, but actually in the Talmud, the law, the tractate of divorce is before the tractate of marriage. And there's a joke, which is a mean joke, but it's a good joke, but it's mean. But I'll share it. That in Torah, we know that God gives the healing before he gives the illness. It's a rule in Torah that God gives the refuah, the healing before the sickness. So before God teaches the laws of marriage, he first tells us the healing, the laws of divorce. That's the joke. But I read today a beautiful explanation. The Torah is telling a man and a woman, both the spouses, that if you want to be happily married, you have to be constantly preventing a divorce. You can't wait till you're divorced to ask yourselves the questions about if your marriage is a right marriage or a wrong marriage, if we've been happily ever after or not. I know, personally, firsthand, many couples that I can see, you can talk, that are not holding at divorce. They're not divorced, but they're not in love. They're not connected to each other. They don't spend time. They're like on two different journeys through life. They happen to share kids in the journey. They happen to share the same house in the journey. They maybe share the same in-laws, the same family commitments, but they're on two different journeys. And I mean, I don't know what's going on in everyone's bedrooms or what's going on deeply in some people's lives, but there's some people that I am close to and I speak to them and you can see, or even if I only speak to one spouse, you can tell. The marriage is not there. Yes, it's there, but it's not there. They're not connected to each other. One spouse is talking to me and venting their frustration, and a big part of the frustration is that they don't feel that they have the support and the backing and the connection of their spouse. They're not on the same page. And therefore, there's no trick, but one of the key factors of successfully staying married is to constantly be asking myself the question that the Mizbeach, the altar, would be asking. Is instead of blaming the other person, which is what we normally do, Instead of putting all the blame on the spouse and saying that they're the ones that are at fault and they're the ones that, I'm the victim. We all do it. I'm the victim. It's she is the one or he is the one. Instead, before things go wrong, before you're ready in marriage counseling, to be objective and to say, how can I make my life better? And I promise, this is unless you're married to someone like a psychopath, that when one spouse begins to commit and to dedicate and to invest in the marriage, there's reciprocal return. There's reciprocal return. I'm reminded of the joke of this guy that he's fed up with his wife. Can't handle it anymore. He's fed up with his wife. He comes to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, I'm done with my wife. I'm done. I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill her. So the rabbi is a very wise man. So he says to the guy, I hear you. I understand where you're coming from. But let me make a suggestion to you. If you were to go now and kill your wife, everyone know that because the things are, and people know that things are not good. The next door neighbor, here's the, they say the joke that the first 5 years that we were married, before we got married, my wife, I did the talking, my wife did the listening. Next 5 years, my wife did the talking, and I did the listening. And now we both do the talking, and the neighbors do the listening. So the rabbi says to this guy, everyone knows you're having a bad marriage, and you've been fighting, and there's been some, rumors going around town. Here's my suggestion to you. I will give you my blessings if spend some time pretending like you're in love with her. Come home tonight. I have just the story in the head. I might be forgetting how it goes exactly. But come home tonight and pretend like you're in love. Bring her a big bouquet of flowers and bring home a delicious dinner. Stop by in the restaurant on the way. Bring home dinner. Surprise her. And for the next year, pretend like you're in love. Take her out. Publicly praise her to other people. And see what happened. And then in the year when people will think that you're happily in love and then she dies in the accident, quote unquote, then, people won't suspect you. Okay, so good idea. Good idea. He goes home. On the way home, he stops to buy a bouquet of flowers. He buys dinner in her favorite restaurant. He comes home. He says, honey, I bought you some flowers. I bought you some sushi. Enjoy. She goes to feel his forehead to make sure he's not having a fever. He's not delirious. No fever. No COVID. She gets it tested right away. He's corona-free. Okay? She feels so in love. You can imagine what happened that night when you come home to your wife with flowers and sushi. It was a great night. The next day, the rabbi calls him up and says, don't mess up the plan. Tonight, you got to go even better than last night. Tonight, go and buy her a present. Make sure that everyone thinks you're in love with her. Go to a store that everyone will see you're buying a big, expensive present. Okay? So he goes to the store, tells the jeweler, I'm buying a present for my wife. I love her so much. You can imagine he comes home with a present and his wife is in love with him. And they go out on a vacation together. Everyone wants to know that they're in love. They're going on a vacation. So they go on vacation together, a big fancy vacation, take a cruise, make sure to tell everyone he's going on a cruise with his beautiful wife. You can imagine that time flies by very, very fast, and they're deeply in love once again. Anyway, if you invest in a marriage, guaranteed, money back guarantee that the spouse will reciprocate in kind. The reason why we're not getting... not we, I should say we. I thank God I'm blessed to have an amazing spouse, an amazing marriage. The reason why some people not is because they're looking at their marriage. What is she doing for me? What is he doing? Instead of asking, what am I doing? Anyway, I wanted to talk about one more idea tonight. How we get married. It's really late. No questions. Everyone's just watching and being quiet. It's hard to know what people are feeling and thinking. You know what? Maybe we'll talk about marriage tomorrow night. I'm going to say something else. Okay. The Torah tells us that you should take a woman and you should marry her. You should take a woman, yikach, and you can marry her. How do you marry a woman? So the Torah doesn't say. The Torah says, ki yikach, you'll take her. But the rabbis in the Talmud learn out from the verses that there are 3 ways that a man can take a woman for himself to be a wife. One is through money, a ring, or anything of value. We use a ring, but it could be anything of value that you give her as a gift in exchange for her marriage. Secondly is a document, we call the ksuba. And the third is marital relations, being intimate together. Now, these three ways of marrying a woman are three legal ways that you can either give her a ring, that you can give her a document, or you can be intimate in bed together. However, these three ways of marriage, today, the rabbi said you shouldn't marry through intimacy, although that used to be allowed. The way to marry is through giving a ring, which is the way we marry today, is through giving money. Specifically, the custom of the Jewish people has become giving a ring to each other. That's become the Jewish custom. And the third is a ksuba, document. And we actually, although we don't primarily use the document as the form of marriage, but at the chuppah we do all three. We give the ring, which is the primary moment of marriage. We give the ksuba, which is a contract. And then after the chuppah, we go into the yichud room, which is the room where the husband and wife, the bride and groom rather, are locked in the room alone. And this is their intimacy where they are left alone in order to consummate their marriage. I want to end tonight with a beautiful message, a beautiful lesson that I learned, how these three forms of marriage are not just three legal states of marriage, but rather they are three dimensions to marriage. There are three dimensions to marriage. Each of these three methods for marrying a woman express one of the three dimensions of the relationship. And then I'll get to all the comments. As I see a bunch of comments came in, I'll get to them after I go through the three forms of marriage. The first form of marriage is through money, where the groom is giving the bride a gift, something tangible, something physical. This represents the physical aspects of the relationship. Meaning when you get married, you're committing to live under the same roof, and to eat dinner together, and to have a joint bank account, unless you have your prenuptial, and to file your taxes, jointly. So the first one dimension of marriage is the physical, tangible, living life together that happens when two people become married. This is represented by the giving of a ring. The second dimension to marriage is more abstract and not tangible. It's more ethereal. This is like the contract, the ksuba of the marriage. The ksuba, the document, doesn't have any monetary value in and of itself. The value of a contract is not on the actual paper. Its value is about what it represents, what it says. And so too, there's another dimension to marriage, which is not just that we live in the same home and that we share a car, we share a bank account, but it's that we are living together, two souls. We share a vision, we share a goal, we share a journey in life, and I give you my wisdom and my love and my kindness, and you share with me your point of view. And that's the second dimension of marriage, which is about creating a bond between two souls. We're connecting to each other on an ethereal, emotional, intellectual, spiritual level. That's the second form of marriage, second dimension of marriage. And then there's a third dimension of marriage, which is represented by the intimacy of the couple, which is the intimacy, the marital intimacy of the husband and wife. Which the truth is that the ultimate goal of marriage is the intimacy and the conception of children that exists in the bedroom of a husband and wife. And in fact, I'm not getting into this tonight, but in Judaism, intimacy is considered a very holy experience. When the highest spiritual experience a person can have, which is also is sex and intimacy, which is why it can also be the lowest and the most corrupt and most perverted thing that a person can do. But that's for another class, for another night. The point is that the physical intimacy, the union, the physical act of being together, husband and wife, is what expresses the deepest bond between them and allows for the creation of a new child. Right? Three dimensions to marriage. There's a physical dimension, there's a spiritual, emotional dimension represented by the contract, and then there is the intimacy, that's the third dimension of marrying a woman, consummating your marriage through being intimate with her, which represents the physical that represents and it creates a very deep emotional, spiritual bond, even deeper than just being spiritual. These three dimensions to marriage are also true in the marriage between God and us. We know that God is the husband, on Shavuos at Mount Sinai, God came and He married us. We are the wife of God. And in the relationship between us and God, there's also 3 dimensions to our relationship, represented through money, represented through a document, and represented by being intimate with God. The betrothal by money is where God blesses us with our physical needs, our physical life, our physical health, our necessities, our job, our car, everything we need in order to do our mission in the world. That's number 1. Number 2 is a betrothal by document. We have a spiritual connection with God. That's not a tangible relationship with God. It's not about what He gives us when we pray for our physical needs. It's a relationship with God that's spiritual. It's about studying His document, which is the Torah, which contains the mysteries and the deepest ideas of godly wisdom. And finally, there is betrothal with God through intimacy. This is the ultimate expression of our connection with God through performing a mitzvah. Because when you do a physical mitzvah, the mitzvah itself is an act of intimacy with God, which allows for a deeper relationship on a spiritual level than could ever be achieved through just being spiritual. Just like talking to your spouse and having long walks on the beach is great and beautiful, but it's not the same depth of a bond that happens through the physical intimacy in the bedroom. The same is true with God. You can study Torah and study Torah and study Torah and achieve great levels of understanding the wisdom of God. But at the end of the day, the greatest connection that can exist with God is specifically when our relationship is done through a mitzvah. When we do a mitzvah, at that moment, we're now connected to God in the most deepest way possible. Okay. Let's see, I got a bunch of comments over here. First of all, I want to give a prayer. I want to give a blessing to every single person watching, everyone that needs to be able to find their bashert. Maybe we're doing a whole other class on the second marriage and second bashert. That's another discussion. But you should, whoever needs to find should find someone that's good for them, that's right for them, that values them and brings out the best in them. We're getting a comment from Martha. They've been married for 54 years. And it's the constant attention to each other, and that's why we are happy. And yes, and I see some couples that are married 54 years, 64 years, and they are the happiest, loving couples you can see. They're so in love with each other that is absolutely beautiful. And yes, and this is the secret to happy marriage, and that's why, Susan, you're Baruch Hashem happily married. Not just because you had rabbis at your wedding. You have a lot of rabbis not be happily married. So when you do for each other with love. And this is the secret of my marriage, of any marriage. The more you invest in your marriage, the more you give to your marriage, the more that you are going to get in return. The more you're going to get in return. It's like in the Coke bottle. It used to be that there was no deposit. You used to have to get a deposit to return the bottle. You get your money back so they wouldn't literally waste the glass. No deposit, no return. My friend, I wish you all a blessing for a beautiful, happy marriage, not just in the marriage between you and your spouse, but between you and your spiritual spouse in heaven, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God Almighty, and that we and Him should be deeply in love with each other. On a physical dimension, God should shower us with every physical need that we need. On a spiritual dimension, and not only should God give us everything we need physically, but spiritually, emotionally, God should give us meaning in our life, purpose in our life, fulfillment in our life, because God could give you a job, and God could give you a home, and God could give you a bank account with a lot of money inside it, and the person could be lost and empty and unfulfilled and lost, floating in the ocean with no purpose. So not only should God invest in our marriage, in His marriage with us, giving us the ring, big, I don't know what's the biggest carat ring. They could be 1,000 carat ring, good diamond. God should give us a spiritual marriage where our lives are full of meaning, of Torah, of value. And most importantly, God should give us the third dimension of the marriage. Actually, we give it to Him, is the intimacy. He should give us the opportunity to do many, many mitzvot, to be able to give charity, to be able to do many mitzvot, to go to shul, to go back to synagogues again after Corona, because it's specifically in the act of the mitzvah. It's in the act of giving charity. It's in the act of going to shul. It's in the act of putting on tefillin. It's in the act of blowing the shofar. In that physical act, just like the physical intimacy between husband and wife in their bedroom, that allows for the deepest, most powerful bond between us and our spouse in heaven. Good night, my friends, with blessings for a happy, healthy, sweet new year. God bless you all. Laila Tov.